Hello and welcome to the third Supreme Commander Forged Alliance Forever faction tutorial. In this video series I tell you what your faction is good at and how to capitalize on its strengths. So for the more advanced stuff, please take a look at the unit comparison charts and the generic unit composition videos, which I'm linking in the description. But now let's finally take a look at the UEF. So this is what a typical UEF game looks like. UEF players are usually not on T1 land for a very long time. Instead they go relatively fast T2 to get access to their T2 heavy tank, the Pillar. This is a very inexpensive unit, so you can get it quickly and you can get a lot of it. And this is going to have a lot of battlefield impact, and you can swarm and steamroll your opponent with Pillars. So of course killing your opponent in the T2 stage is not always going to work out. This is why UEF players have a backup plan, and this backup plan is called Percival Spam. They make use of the second main asset in their army. Percival is a heavy T3 bot, a very good unit, but unlike the Pillar, this one is expensive. So you typically don't get it very early, and you rather get it late and you get a lot of it. So you want to extend your T2 stage and not get fast T3, and once you hit T3 you want to scale up your production for lots of Percivals, right? This is your standard game plan. This is what the Pillar and the Percival look like. Even if you do not have any understanding of the UEF military, please memorize these two units because they are the backbone of any UEF army. Make sure you do not confuse them, because the UEF has access to two T2 tanks, the Pillar and the Riptide, and you want to be building the Pillar. Likewise, UEF has access to two T3 bots, one is the Titan and one is the Percival. Make sure you memorize the Percival and you forget about the Titan. Both of these units are typically more effective in groups than by themselves. So the Pillar is usually going to lose in a 1 versus 1 against the T2 tanks of other factions. This is why you simply make sure to build more Pillars, and you can easily do so because of how inexpensive they are. And the Percival is kind of vulnerable because of its slow fire cycle. So if you run it into lots of low-tech units, they might swarm it, and the Percival is only going to deliver overkill damage to very few units, and the others survive and take it out. So you can also out-micro the Percival with some faster T3 units such as the Harby, and then you would make sure that you build multiple Percivals and send them in together as UEF player. So now you know what a standard UEF game plan looks like, but of course your opponents are going to know the same. And let's take Aeon as an example. The Aeon player is trying to stop the UEF player from getting Pillars and from getting Percivals. So what is the Aeon player going to do? Well, they're going to build some Aurora early on, and usually the Aeon player is going to have the advantage in the T1 stage because the Aurora has higher range than the Striker, and the Striker is not going to be very efficient against the Aurora. So the UEF player typically gets gun upgrade, gets T1 bombers against the Aurora, or like builds walls and point defense, and this is a minor adjustment in the Pillar Rush strategy to account for the Aurora offense, and then they get back on track on their linear game plan. So what the UEF player wants to prevent is not interacting with the Aurora flood at all, because this is going to kill them and the game ends right here. And they do not want to keep building T1 bombers for the rest of the game and forget about Pillar Rush, right? Because this, for example, would mean they are being led astray, and they're going to die eventually, because the Aeon player is of course going to keep playing, and even though the T1 bombers may work out now, they're not going to work out forever. And over here we have the Harp Rush from the Aeon player. The Harbies are going to get transported next to the T2 power generators of the UEF player, next to the factory that is upgrading to T3, and perhaps in important expansions, so the UEF player can lose lots of important build power, tech and power, and that this is often lethal. So the UEF player wants to make sure that the Aeon player cannot kill them with the Harp Rush, and typically this is done by securing expansions with point defense, including a T2 point defense, which is going to get built by Sparkies, and a gun and T2 ACU can do the same on the other side of the map. Of course, your ACU would always have overcharge against harps, and your core would be protected by patrolling interceptors, and you would of course also consider building some protection next to your HQ and your T2 power generator, because these are prominent targets for harp rush. And then with these minor adjustments you can get back on track on your linear game plan, and you're going for your Percival Spam, and in the end the Aeon player won't be able to do much against critical mass of Percivals, and you're going to win. So let's briefly introduce the interaction of the UEF player with other factions too. So the Siren player is going to have access to Mantis bots, and they are going to come in groups. They're going to be very fast, giving him a speed advantage, and these are going to raid the UEF player's expansions and perhaps also the core. So the UEF player should make sure to have radar, to have T1 land scouts, and to have T1 air scouts. These can identify incoming Mantis bots, and the slow strikers of the UEF player can intercept the incoming Mantis in time. Seraphim players are typically going to go for a combat ACU Phobo push, and of course this is also going to threaten your pillar rush. Then you want to make sure that you have some sort of defense against it. So for example, the UEF player can go for a T2 upgrade on the ACU and build some T2 PD, and the Seraphim player will be stalled and forced to get a nano upgrade before attacking again. Or the UEF player can go for a gun and nano himself. The UEF nano hits the battlefield before the Seraphim nano hits the battlefield. Even though the UEF nano is not as good, you can outrush the Seraphim player and you can force the Seraphim player back. The initial push will not work, and this buys you some time for pillars. Cyber players are frequently going for some T2 snipe. Can be gunships, can be corsairs, can be TML, can be fire beetles. Lots of options for the Cyber player, and Cyber players can target the ACU, they can target an upgrading factory, or they can target the expansions as well as power generators. So you want to make sure to have enough T1 air to protect yourself against that, and all the attacks that rely on counter intel such as TML and beetle drops are something you would like to scout, right? And the loyalists are typically going to be used by the Siren player to kill large groups of pillars, and they hit the field before the Percivals are active, so it's important that you have secured your expansions with some point defense, because loyalists are going to die against the point defense, right? And Seraphim players in the super late game are going to have access to advanced combatant support ACUs, and these can overcharge groups of Percivals, so then you would mix in some parashields, but ideally you would try to avoid running into these and kill the Seraphim player before they have access to these, right? And with these adjustments, as long as the UEF player gets back on their linear game plan, they're eventually going to win. So to summarize everything, the UEF player typically wants to steamroll their enemy with a huge swarm. This can be a huge swarm of pillars, can be a huge swarm of Percivals. Both is going to work. But of course, the UEF player needs to take into account that swarms take time to build up. So UEF players typically vulnerable when they're getting a fast T2, and if they get swarmed by T1 units while the factory is upgrading, it's game over. So be a little careful with that. And you also want to make use of your swarm of pillars or swarm of Percivals as soon as you have it, because even though many pillars can deal with low amounts of T3 units and many Percivals can deal with low amounts of experimentals, you don't want to wait for too long, because eventually your opponent is going to have a counter, and this is why you want to identify a good attack timing. So typically you have two chances to attack. One is while you have pillars and your opponent has nothing, and the one is when you have Percivals and your opponent has nothing. And by design, this situation often happens because the timings where the factions are strong are not mutually overlapping. So typically you can identify these situations in which it is safe to attack, and you will do so without waiting. And lastly, you want to secure your expansions, because of course even UEF is going to have times where they are not very strong. So if they are going for fast pillars, they're going to be vulnerable on the T1 stage, and having some T1 PD in their expansions is going to be helpful. And against very fast T3, the UEF player who's stuck on T2 and not yet ready to get Percivals is also going to be vulnerable. So it's also important to secure the expansions, perhaps with T2 PD built by Sparkies, right? And this is how a UEF gameplay works in a nutshell. I hope you like this video, and I hope you're going to apply what you learned. And good luck, have fun in your games.